everyone, welcome to 99% Sure. My name is TJ and we're back with a brief look at the antagonist to Paul Revere's ride, General Thomas Gage. So Gage is a bit of a curious case, but seeing things from his viewpoint is going to help us understand how events fall in place leading up to the Revolutionary War. So who was General Gage? Gage had been the overall commander of British forces in America since 1763. And what's more, in 1774, about a year before Paul Revere's ride, he was appointed to replace the unfortunate Thomas Hutchinson as governor of Massachusetts as well, Gage now serving a dual role as military governor. On paper back then, you might have thought he's an ideal fit. Gage had been in the colonies for years and was familiar with the situation. He was military and had pushed for stronger measures from Parliament, but was balanced by a moderate and cautious reputation, and he even had a bit of a colonial perspective, having married an American woman, Margaret Kemble, known for her strong opinions on British policies. Understandably, England may have viewed him as their guy to settle things down. That decision didn't work out too well. Now, you could sum him up as bumbling or tyrannical. Hollywood, so to speak, seems to love the bloodthirsty, out-of-touch trope in their depictions of Gage. But the actual story is much more interesting than any sort of cartoonish villain. I've gone from 99% sure I've got him figured out to increasingly unsure over time. Much of Gage's problems stemmed from the challenge of enforcing royal authority without making a tense standoff worse. Gage also seemed to seesaw between understanding what he was up against and totally underestimating the full situation. Now, having to be both a military figure and governor was problematic. On the governor's side of things, Gage seemed to have mutually exclusive goals. He was a firm believer in the rule of law. Naturally, the colonists should submit to the authority of the king and parliament. And yet, while trying to act forcefully, he fell short of truly draconian measures. Gage's same adherence to the rule of law seemed to have made him ethically unable to bring himself to go all out against English liberties. Known patriots were unarrested. Boston newspapers were left alone, despite personal attacks on Gage that seem shocking today. Skipping ahead a little bit here, he also forbade any plundering or destruction of private property during the mission to Concord. Gage also struggled with banning any new town meetings under the Coercive Acts. Boston, for one, used a clever bureaucratic trick, adjourning a previous meeting to continue later. These tactics weren't exactly insurmountable obstacles for a military leader, yet Gage backed down. Rules were rules. Gage's actions resulted in an increasingly frustrated army and political administration in London, while addressing none of the colonial complaints. On the military side of his role, Gage had other problems. What he really wanted was more troops, but in April 1775, Gage instead received orders from London to get on with it, to put down the rebellion with what he had. With a few thousand soldiers, he knew he'd be outnumbered in New England should fighting break out. So Gage had set up a strong intelligence network. He was aware of patriot meetings and leadership, but there was a problem. He knew arresting the leaders would likely only make things worse. In fact, contrary to popular belief about the march to Concord, Gage seemed to flat out ignore the part of his orders from London to arrest people like Hancock and Adams. And importantly, on a personal level, he genuinely wanted to avoid bloodshed. So how do you keep a rebellious colony in line if you aren't willing to go full Hulk? Gage figured the only chance he had was using that intelligence network for quick, secretive attacks on the colony's ability to make war. This was high risk, high reward. If militia stores and munitions were destroyed, maybe that would dampen the fighting spirit and give time for cooler heads to prevail. However, if they failed, it would certainly make things worse. Thus, his plan to quietly send 700 to 800 soldiers to Concord to destroy the military supplies stockpiled there. But fail the mission did. Maybe the strategy would have worked, but we'll never know. His secret march was ultimately discovered. Revere, Dawes, Prescott, and others alerted the militia, and fighting broke out on the way to Concord. His Hail Mary attempt to prevent fighting backfired. Instead of subverting resistance, this small force was overwhelmed and gave the Patriot side a critical early victory. Gage remained in charge for the attack on Bunker Hill in June, and according to tradition, viewed the battle's progress from the steeple of Old North Church. But shortly after, and with increased waffling on military matters, he was recalled to England and ultimately replaced by General Howe. Gage's story raises more interesting topics than we have time to cover. When even the British commander had conflicting views, what does that say about everyone else back then? How did Gage's American ties influence his thinking? In fact, was the revolution more of a civil war? But by examining Gage's considerations in the early stages of the war, we get a more complete idea of the events that unfold. Perhaps it was an impossible task, but Gage tried to walk a line between preserving royal authority and preventing fighting, and accomplished neither. And this was just a few of the ways Gage directly shaped events. If you find anything interesting, especially if it wasn't covered here, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below or on Old North's blog. We do keep an eye on any questions you have, and we'll do our best to answer them. Follow the link below to help support the site, and or you can share this video with others. But thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you on our next episode of 99% Sure.